Hi everyone, this is Double Canopy. I'm Joe. Today we have Sam Osborne. He is a self-funding, independent, holistic, ecological researcher and farmer in the foothills of the Carpathian Mountains in Poland. His research into extinct megafauna, grazing habits, and migration patterns is revelatory in its implications to our current situation today. Thank you for coming, Sam.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Great to have you. It's 8 o'clock there, almost 9.
Yeah, 8:30 here at the moment.
It's about lunchtime here in California. I'm wondering, are you related to Ozzy Osborne?
No.
No. Okay.
Yeah, he's got a U in his name. Mine doesn't have a U, but we
Osborne
didn't live that far from each other.
Oh, really?
Yeah, well, maybe 60 miles, something like that.
Okay. So you grew up in Sherwood Forest, and I mentioned to you that Robin Hood played a huge role in my early childhood. He was a big hero of mine. And it occurred to me this morning, I was thinking all the movies I've seen about Robin Hood were all Hollywood movies, American Hollywood movies. So I was wondering, did you guys grow up in Sherwood Forest in England? Did you grow up with your own TV shows, movies about Robin Hood?
There were the Hollywood movies, and I think there was like a series as well, if I remember right. But yeah, it was a big influence on me because it was not too far away.
Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah, I just wondered if it was a bigger deal to me than it was to you guys over there. I don't know.
Well, pretty iconic character,
Yeah.
And stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. So that's got a big thumbs up.
Yeah, well, not only that, but I always think of him as like a forest ninja. You know, he's elusive, he's hard to find, he's one with nature. And
I mean, funny enough, we'll be hopefully delving into this a lot more. Forest structure, whether he was on horseback or on foot. You know, the structure of the forest is something that I think we need to really research and explore a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
But as we get through some of this material tonight.
Yeah. So how did you get interested in megafauna?
Well, living in Sherwood, I spent most of my kind of childhood wandering around, wading through streams and rivers and lakes and just being around, really. It's a pretty relaxed place.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad was a farm worker, farm labourer,
Mm-hmm.
And he lost his job because he got injured. So the farm that he worked for sacked him. That was, and we had to move.
Mm-hmm.
And he worked on another farm, and it kind of gave me free access to the farm that he worked on and the neighbouring farmers. So yeah, I spent a lot of my kind of early years just wandering around fields and through woodlands. And
Mm-hmm.
I had this big impression about, that I thought I knew what nature was. I didn't know the names of the plants or the trees or anything, but, just being in there and experiencing it, I suppose. And this was a livestock area, but there were some, mixed farms and crops.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's I've had quite a long farming background. Then I went off to London when I was about 20 and did the big bright lights and experienced everything in London,
Mm-hmm.
which was very educational, I could say.
Always.
And then 20 years later, moved back out and kind of thought, well, that's it. I'm done with cities. I want to go back to the countryside. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I've done that ever since. So, long story cut short, I moved over to Poland and bought a small holding, 3 hectares. It's pretty hilly round here, very varied kind of topography,
Mm-hmm.
all within a short kind of, reach. Going about 4 kilometers in either direction. There's lots of different landscapes. It's quite amazing. And didn't have a lot of money. I didn't have a tractor. Trying to farm, getting other people to plow fields for me and do things. It didn't go very well. I was, everything was on a shoestring. And then I had a hernia, had to go in hospital, had an operation. And just as I came out, we had a huge storm and it took away the road that leads to the farm.
Oh, wow.
And if you can imagine, we got like a hill coming down here and part way down, there's a track, it's not a tarmac or asphalt, it's just a dirt track with stones. Mm-hmm. And then it continues down again and there's a stream and there's lots of trees growing there and the whole thing collapsed. It was about 100-meter stretch. It collapsed in 2 or 3 places. It was awful. And to say, I was on crutches. could hardly walk recovering from this operation.
Yeah.
But I went down there and I did actually manage to do some work to it. We got a digger from the local council, kind of helped us out and did some of the work. And then 2 weeks later, it collapsed again. We're back to square one.
Wow.
But I made some observations, and it's weird because where the stone was, where the wheels of the vehicles go, that was all stone. That had all gone. It was about a foot deep.
Mm-hmm.
But the bit in the middle with the grass, that's just totally intact, not a mark. So I looked at it and thought, well, hang on, the grass is, maybe about that long.
Yep.
And it's got hundreds and thousands of tiny roots all holding the soil together. And, if the grass is growing like that and then a load of water comes along, it just folds it all down and it kind of forms this really protective layer against the erosion.
Mm-hmm.
So I looked at that and thought, well, that's pretty interesting. Maybe, maybe that's one of the problems in that kind of area. And it was basically because when I looked at the trees, there was a thick ecotone on the edge of where the trees were. Next to the track, there were big tall trees, but on the branches were quite low to the ground, and there was lots of vegetation growing up, climbing plants. It was like a thick hedge.
Yeah.
But when you climbed inside there, it was like empty. There was nothing growing on the ground on these steep banks. There were no tiny little roots. There were the tree roots deep below, but they're not doing anything on the surface. And when water rolls down there, it takes soil with it.
Right.
So I looked at that, was pretty interesting.
When was this? How long ago?
This is about 10 years ago, probably more, about 12 years ago. But the thing is, even when you've got leaf litter on the ground, if you get a lot of rain or a lot of water, the individual particles, they operate by gravity, and if they've got water aiding them, they'll roll down actually underneath the leaf litter. I think this is happening in millions of places. Yep. And there's this idea that trees stop erosion, and to a certain extent they can do, but they can also, in my experience and my opinion now, is that they can actually promote erosion and accelerate it.
Yeah. I mean, I think you can see it just where I'm at. A lot of the hillsides for a long part of the year don't have roots in the ground on the regular surface, but there's trees everywhere and bare ground everywhere, and you see the soil eroding and tree roots sticking out, and you do see eroded hillsides, and it's where the roots are of the trees, where the soil is sloughed off.
And then somebody comes along and takes this really funky photo of all these exposed roots and how they've all barked over, and I go, oh, isn't nature wonderful? And I look at it and I'm like, gosh, look at the erosion there is just amazing, because when you think about it, it's not the whole life of that tree that erosion has taken a foot away. It's probably half the life or a third of the life of the tree, because it had to grow to a certain amount before it formed those roots anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And this is like a slow, silent, unobserved phenomenon that I had no idea that was going on until I started studying my little road and bank. So I started cutting back the thick edge and doing a crown lift and trying to let some more light into that area to get more surface roots to hold it all together. And I had to kind of put soil and stones and a rock down there, and I've been trying to lift the bed of the stream up. And I started using check dams, actually. I put about 20 check dams in, and they all collect sediment and gradually rise up, and then I increase them, and I'm...
Gotcha. Is that what a check dam is? I don't know what that is.
Well, it's what a check dam can be, because it could be used for lots and lots of different things. But incidentally, beaver dams apparently work in the same way, that because it slows the flow of water down and it makes it wider, so any sediment can then just deposit on the bottom of the bed. Mm-hmm. I actually gained about half a meter one year. It was the first year I noticed. I inadvertently had created a check dam, and after the winter thaw, in the spring, I noticed it had gone up. I don't know, about a foot or 2 foot.
Right.
It was like, wow, that's going to save me a lot of work. Let's do some more of those.
I mean, you could eventually rebuild that whole area.
That's the long-term plan, yeah.
Incredible.
I've had animals in there a couple of times, but part of the ground isn't mine, only on one side. But it's something I'm working on. It's all all projects I'm doing are long-term projects.
Sure.
So there's that aspect, but there's the other aspect is because I've got 3 hectares, and I soon worked out after seeing all this erosion that ploughing was like a waste of time. Just forget it. So I stopped any ploughing, any crops, and went over to 100% grass and ground vegetation. I don't care if it's not grass. I don't mind nettles or bramble. Anything is good.
Yeah,
and
that's
it
interesting.
should be local.
I think it was a soil scientist here in the U.S., Ray Archuleta, who was saying that weeds are nature's way of trying to cover the ground. We need to have roots in the ground, and if it's bare, weeds are good enough. If we don't have grass,
I don't really use the word weeds anymore because they don't exist in my perception anymore.
Yeah,
really, they're part of the plant sequence, and they're not a problem. If we think they're a problem, then we don't understand ecology at all.
Will their ruminants eat the nettle?
At times,
Goats probably.
If they're young, my sheep used to kind of eat nettles pretty regularly when they're young, and you can make soup from them as well. You can do lots of different things with nettles.
Interesting.
So I kind of got into livestock then and bought some sheep. And this is quite funny here because like in this area there are no fences or hedges, and it's a kind of open field system. The only kind of boundaries that are kind of, let's say, visible are, where I've got about 3 streams on my land, various places. So we got these kind of riparian strips. With the erosion, they're pretty deep in a lot of places, quite steep ravines, terrible erosion. But the fields all owned by different people. I've got 3 fields all in 3 separate places.
Okay.
And no fences. So when I thought about getting livestock, it was like, this is going to be expensive, because if I drew a perimeter around each field, then there's about 15 miles and 7 acres.
Right.
15 miles is an exaggeration, but
all the way
it's
around,
not a square block that I can just contain. So I thought, okay, well, the only way I can do this is to build some hurdles and put the sheep. I only had 3 sheep, not a lot, using a hurdle system. So I started doing that. And then about, 6 months, a year later, I was listening to the radio, and there's this article about mob grazing. And that was with sheep, the article, and sounded really interesting. And I thought, hang on, I'm doing that already.
So what is mob grazing exactly?
It actually has lots of different names, and they're all very contentious. But it's basically putting quite a high density of animals on a small area of land so that the animals impact everything, let's say, reasonably evenly, and then moving them to another cell, a grazing cell.
Right.
The cells could be any size. It all depends on how many animals you have, what kind of animals, what kind of impact you're looking for. And this is like slowly emerging, and for all the regenerative farmers that I'm aware of, they're always looking at achieving a certain kind of impact in a certain time of year, depending on the weather conditions, all different things. And it's something you actually kind of get the hang of relatively quickly, because you see the impact from today, and you then look at the impact and how it's developing from yesterday and the day before and like going back 2 or 3 months. You see how everything responds. You soon get an idea of how much land to give them, and maybe changing your plans for the future.
Right, the frequency.
Yeah, but the idea is that it kind of mimics migrating animals, migrating herbivores on the landscape.
Why has that taken us so long to figure that out? I mean, maybe it's just because of the size of our properties. A farmer has only so much room. Maybe, he just lets them roam on that size, and that's what he's got. But I mean, you think about migration patterns of animals, it's like, they move around in nature.
Well, some of them do still, but not many. So a lot of marine animals freely migrate. Birds migrate. But how many herbivores migrate now?
Right.
I started looking at this. For all the work I did with the erosion and my sheep, I started looking at other herbivores, wild herbivores, and looking at extinct herbivores. And oh boy, it's been a total revelation. I mean, it's just mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So yeah, like very, very, I mean, how many animals now migrate? A few elephants in Africa, but they're probably restricted by
National park boundaries.
issues with people growing crops on an ever contracting habitat because of different social pressures, urban pressures, things like that. You've got the reindeer and the caribou up in near the Arctic. You've got the Sami who herd with their reindeer, and you've got the caribou, I think, over in Alaska. They migrate. Maybe a few other animals, but most of the world. And I went all over the world looking on Street View and research and everything. It's like there's very, very few migrating herbivores now. And for me, that is profound. I mean, with the extinct herbivores from the last 10,000 years, the mammoth, the mastodon, and there are lots of others as well.
Real quick, I wanted to ask you: is there a mega beaver that is extinct? Beavers are fascinating to me, and I wonder if there is a big one at some point.
There probably, I've got an idea there might be, yeah. But I'd need to double check.
Okay.
Because it's weird, because there are lots of kind of giant animals that went extinct, and like with the giant ground sloth in America and South America. They existed all over the world, on most terrestrial, vegetated continents.
Right.
There were large animals, and some of them were actually very, very large. So I found that when I got into dinosaurs. So South America, Patagotitan, Argentinosaurus. Argentinosaurus was 100 tons, or so estimates say. It's got this great big long neck, big body, long tail, typical dinosaur shape.
Yep.
It's not sexy like Tyrannosaurus Rex, because everybody always goes for the predators, don't they? It's got to be a gnashing teeth and thing.
The alpha.
I'm more interested in the herbivores, and the herbivores were bigger. They're always bigger. There's like a ratio. The biggest carnivore is always a lot smaller than the biggest herbivore. So like an elephant and a lion. So the same with Patagotitan or Argentinosaurus and T-Rex. They were a lot bigger. I mean, like massive.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing some kind of scientific evaluation of their incredibly long neck, and somebody had suggested it was to save energy because they kind of were ground eaters and waved it around. And I'm like, what are you on?
Yeah.
Why does a giraffe have a long neck? So it can reach the leaves of trees high up, and there's less competition up there with other herbivores.
Yeah. Have you seen giraffes fight?
I saw one kill a lion on video. I've never been to Africa. I'd love to go, but
with its neck? Did you see it with its neck?
No.
They whack with their neck. It looks extremely violent and brutal. It's shocking. You wouldn't think that they're capable of it, but they use their horns and they whip it around and whack their opponent. It's wild. And I mean, you think of those dinosaurs with those long necks. Maybe they were doing the same thing. I don't know.
Possibly, yeah.
Defense mechanism.
Yeah. But one thing I kind of get from the dinosaurs is that, well, let me jump back to the sheep for a minute, because I was mob grazing my sheep in their little compounds, and it was a really baking hot day on a south-facing slope. The sheep, I mean, they're panting. They've obviously got heat stress, and I'm ferrying water over to them in buckets. And I thought, well, this is crazy. Why don't I just kind of take their compound into the woods, and then they're in the shade? So I did that. And there was kind of ground flora, because this was on the northern side, so it wasn't so thick on the edge. There was, actually some light getting in, and there was some ground flora in that section anyway. So they were munching on that, but then some of them started eating the lower leaves of the trees. So I'm like, hang on, what's going on here? This is like, sheep are supposed to eat grass, and they're supposed to eat forbs. I know that. But I don't know anything about them eating the leaves of trees. Like, what is this? And it was a baking hot day. It was too hot to do anything energetic, so I sat down and watched them for half an hour. And that was, I think, the moment that absolutely changed my life, because it just kind of dawned on me that, well, if sheep are eating the leaves of trees, then why are they doing it? Well, I didn't teach my sheep to eat anything or not to eat anything. They arrived at my farm as lambs, and they taught themselves what was good to eat and what was not good to eat. And I trust them. They know what they're doing. They've got very sensitive noses. They've got good sense of taste. They know what to eat and what not to eat. So here they are eating the leaves of trees. So, well, it's pretty obvious they're supposed to be eating those. And that's what kind of got me on to looking at the megafauna, is that, well, okay, if sheep are eating trees, what other animals should be eating trees? And I looked into it, and I looked at elephants and giraffe, and like Africa, it's fine for animals to eat the leaves of trees in Africa. We know that elephants do that, and we know that giraffes do that. Everybody knows that. So why can't it happen in Europe?
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you why it's not happening in Europe is because the animals that did it went extinct.
Yeah.
And the ones that might do it, and I get this, I haven't got a big ruck with ecologists, but I do have a big difference of opinion with a lot of them, because animals like deer and sheep are seen as pests. A lot of ecologists hate livestock, and they're not really too impressed with deer as well because they eat their precious plants, and I can understand that.
Yeah.
But
in some places it is a problem. In Scotland, there's whole regions that have been deforested because of the deer.
Yeah. But is it the deer that are the problem, or is it they're not migrating?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So,
Sure.
like, it is a really complex kind of thing.
I agree.
You can't just
Yeah.
look at
I don't
one
think deer are a problem. It's just how things are playing out. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I just started looking into herbivores that eat trees and found that in the Americas, the giant ground sloth went extinct. It was bigger than elephants. It's got great big long kind of claws for kind of grabbing branches, and it's a possibility as well. I kind of looked at it, and it's the same with any animal. I look at the body shape, the features, the size, and think, okay, what did it do? What impact did it have? So with the ground sloth, we know that the normal size ones climb trees.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, maybe the giant ones did too. Nobody was around to record it. There were no scientists around then, so nobody actually recorded it.
That's true. But how could a tree support an animal that big?
Well, the big tree would.
A big tree. I mean, were they in North America? Would they be eating pines? Would they be? I've never heard of we have over here we have pine needles. They're long, needly things. But that raises the question, because those sharp, thin, spiky things could be seen as a defense mechanism of the plant itself. So maybe they were being eaten, and that's one of the things they developed themselves to not get eaten.
Yeah. Jumping back to the dinosaurs quickly, when the dinosaurs all went extinct, or most of them went extinct 66 million years ago, the big ones like Argentinosaurus were conifer eaters, because there weren't, I think, either any or many deciduous trees around at that time. The conifers evolved much, much earlier. I think it was conifers, cycads, palms, giant horsetails. So these were all the primitive kind of trees. And then after the dinosaurs went extinct, there weren't really many animals that consumed conifers. I think the early rhino did, and maybe some of the modern ones would, if there were any around. So that kind of, if I just jump back into the dinosaurs again, the Argentinosaurus, 100-ton dinosaur like that, walking into a modern conifer forest that's really densely packed, would decimate it. They would probably knock about 80, 85, maybe 90% of the trees down.
Yeah.
It's 100 tons.
Yeah.
You know? It's going to just flick its tail and 3 trees will go down. It would look like chaos.
Mm-hmm.
But then in the following years, we've now got sunlight coming onto the ground. We've got more ground flora growing. We've got seeds that were lying on the floor that didn't get any sunlight. They sit there and wait until the conditions come right. And then as soon as you've got now rainfall getting down to the forest floor as well, and sunlight, some of those are going to be sprouting up. And what you should end up with, let's say after 50 years, is a community of trees, not just loads of big mature ones blocking everything out. You'll have mature ones at a much wider spacing, let's say 20 or 30 meters apart, and in between different age ones that are all attempting to be the replacements.
Mm-hmm.
And you've also got herbivores coming down, eating them and squashing them, smashing them over. And what we end up with is this, the plant sequence where you go from bare ground to kind of high forest over a period of time.
Yep.
The herbivores, in my opinion, this is my kind of theory, the herbivores disrupt that plant sequence at all stages. So you end up with every different stage of the plant sequence somewhere in a local kind of area. It's all happening all together at the same time.
Right.
So the structure of the forest then would be very, very different than what we see now.
Yeah, our idea of like an old growth forest, it probably didn't exist back then. Because like you said, there's multiple stages. And
yeah, how we perceive forest is really important, because we just think, okay, it's loads of trees in this area, but then that doesn't explain like all the sun-loving plants. And when you look at a map, you can see where people have been, because there are these straight lines. There's this kind of like open field area with arable or livestock, and then there's this kind of big straight line, and that's where the forest is. Nature doesn't do stuff like that. It mixes everything in together.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I think we're looking at is more of a kind of spectrum of all the different types of savanna, all the different spacings of trees. Apparently savanna has got to be something to do with rainfall. But quite frankly, when I look at science, there are so many different contradictions in kind of defining what things are. To be perfectly honest, and this might be controversial, but I don't really mind because I'm not a scientist. If the herbivores had such a big impact on the structure of vegetation, the vegetative structure, then when they went extinct, or when the bulk of them went extinct, everything changed. The structures changed.
Mm-hmm.
We got those high canopy forests. We got maybe the open areas because people were starting agriculture there.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time we actually started, let's say, serious science, so we've got science from 1,000 years ago, kind of golden era, we got the modern European science. We took the datum of being this newly formed structure. That's what everybody relates to. That's a forest over there, that's a pasture, that's this, that's a desert, whatever. We have no idea what it looked like in the past. And when I start looking at archaeology, because, ancient dinosaurs and things like that, a lot of this archaeology, the archaeologists know very, very little about what it is, the bone. They do reconstructions of the animal. A lot of it is on what their perception is.
Sure.
Like I said before, nobody in living memories see these structures or the way that it actually operated. Mm-hmm. And we kind of putting this modern datum on everything, thinking that, oh yeah, this is a problem or that's a problem, but without, I think, understanding the whole system as it used to be. The problem I have, because I've been on Twitter now for like 3 years trying to kind of explain this, it's a very conceptual thing. I look at that geezer who kind of discovered that the earth was round, and I thought, wow, that would be nice, because everybody had this idea of what round was. An apple, an orange, a ball. We're all kind of perfectly connected with the concept of round. But what I'm talking about is that all the plants that we see, they would still be there, but just arranged it in a completely different way. And for the fact that I have never seen it, and neither has anybody else, it's really hard to describe to people what I think it would be like, but it's not what I think. I take my information from the animals, and I look at the animals, the size, the shape, the features, and I guess or imagine what impacts they would have had. But there's plenty of evidence that we can get from our current animals. So I posted on Twitter a couple of weeks ago a series of videos about elephants pushing over trees, ripping branches off, doing highly destructive, or so it seems, things to trees. Mm-hmm. That if that happened in Europe or in America, people would be like, oh,
you're destroying habitat.
We can't do that. Yes, it's a very fragile ecosystem. Yeah. And I'm like, bullshit. There is no such thing as a fragile ecosystem. There should be animals in ecosystems. Where there are plants growing, there should be herbivores. That's why they evolved.
Yeah.
Because if they hadn't evolved, then there'd just be plants everywhere. Choked with plants.
Just look at beavers. They are so weird. They eat trees. They chew around the base of it. They make dams. If you just watch a beaver, you would think that they're just the most destructive force in nature. But they're creating ecosystems.
Yeah, they do so many things, and I spend a lot of time looking at the biggest animals. But when I look at beaver, I go, well, that's going to be worth one Patago Titan, hasn't it? Because it can fell a huge tree. An elephant can't do that.
Yeah. Takes them a little bit more time, but yeah.
Yeah. But the thing is, when you start looking at what happens when they do that, let's say you've got a riparian zone and it's all dense trees and whatever. A beaver comes along, is like, okay, that one, and it's taking out the trees. That's letting the sunlight in. It's allowing ground flora on the forest floor. It's creating a dam, so that slows down the flow of water and the water gets wider. Well, that's now going to be a focal point for a lot of wild animals to come and drink.
Mm-hmm.
The water's cleaner there than anywhere else. There's going to be fish in there, a whole lot going on. It's just absolutely phenomenal. But the thing is, when you look at the large herbivores, they would be doing very, very similar things in the rest of the forest further away from the watercourse.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really get much of my information from books. I get little facts and snippets of information that, I'm hunting for,
Mm-hmm.
but I get most of it from animals. And I think that's kind of where we've been going wrong with ecology and our understanding of ecology.
Yeah.
We've been studying it without the animals.
Mm-hmm.
It's not intact.
Yeah.
So how can we understand it if it's not intact in the first place?
It's really sparking my imagination because here in California, even, my brother and I used to take walks and just imagine what it was like 500 years before now.
Yeah.
Not even that long ago, and it was way different. There was way more animals. Not necessarily megafauna, but if you walk through the Sierras, there's trees everywhere, and
that's it. There's nothing much else.
There's not a lot else. And you just imagine what it would look like with megafauna coming in and clearing things up and moving things around. I talked to a retired Park Service scientist. He was a soil scientist, actually. And we were talking about trees and tree density, that we have wildfire problem here in California. And he says that part of the reason is the density of trees. It's a problem, and there's too many trees, and you wouldn't think that, from a environmentalist perspective, you would think, more trees the better, but not necessarily. And I guess there's stories that the natives would clear some of the trees too, so they weren't so close to each other.
Yeah, definitely. And it's there are so many different aspects to this kind of idea. We've got the tree density, the ground flora in between at all different ages, and lots and lots of different plants. But we've also got the deadwood. As an elephant walks past a tree, then some of the lower non-viable branches that have been stripped of leaves would be broken off. When an elephant treads on it, it probably squashes it into the ground, so it rots down quicker.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if the same thing could happen with a mature tree, with a Patago Titan, because it's 70 tons or 100 tons, so even a thick tree with 100 tons on is going to go into that ground, especially if it's moist. And the cycling of everything is happening much quicker.
Yeah.
Within those spaces, we get what I call dynamic multi-habitats, because when the herbivores come through, they trample lots of stuff, they break it, they don't care about fragile ecosystems or anything like that. They just want to eat, and if it gets in the way, it gets pushed down. So there's all this stuff and what would appear to be chaos now going on. And within all those niche little habitats, and it could be just a load of squashed kind of grasses, loads of life takes opportunity.
Yeah.
Lots of different species love those situations.
Yeah.
And at the moment, they're not getting any.
Right.
So
it's because there's ground cover that microbe colonies can thrive, insects, you name it. It creates that ground cover or mulch. Allan Savory talks about this, the ground litter. That's what creates the conditions for fertility, soil fertility.
And regrowth. So, if you take a flowering window of a plant, let's say, so plant X flowers between May and June. When a herbivore's been kind of eating it in March before it made flowers, then instead of being May, June, it could be halfway through May and June and halfway through July, or it could be June, July. That flowering window is now being extended and opened up. There's just much more variation. Or if the flowers themselves got eaten, then the plant might be like, hang on, let's have another go. And the flowers could be even later. We have this kind of I think, blinkered view of ecology, as in, we step out there and we daren't touch anything and we record it and here's all this data. And we're not seeing it actually operating properly. So we have all this information about how it's working in this, I call it a dysfunctional state, because it's not intact.
Yeah.
So how accurate is any of the data that we've got? How do we know for a fact that that's how it works? I don't think we do. And there's like, this actually opens up huge realm for research and further investigation, because I don't think it is as complicated as we imagine on the outside. It obviously does have its complexity.
Sure.
But the simplest form of it is like we have plants growing, we have animals called herbivores that eat them and impact them, and then we have carnivores that basically just stop the bones from piling up. So it's complete the circle.
I would agree. I mean, that's in my journey of education on these topics, that's been my intuition all along. This is simpler than we struggle to make it, and we have to understand some basic principles, but after that, it's, I look back on my previous interviews I've done. I want to do a video where I just break down the basic lesson from each of them, and they're almost dead simple. I mean, the first video I did, they dropped low-cost agricultural products on the ground, and it turned into a jungle. They basically, that's all they did. I mean, and they studied it. But the lesson is like, you don't have to do much. There, you just put it out there, and it takes off and does its own thing.
Yeah, and for me, the animals lead the way. They are the fundamental elements, and there's just so much to learn. I think it's taken my life over, actually. It's not that I'm obsessed with it, but it's so bloody fascinating.
Yeah.
Ecology is actually lying dormant. It's got our knee on its neck, and it's like, well, just kind of get off. It's not a case of get off, but let me operate properly. And I think the animals are the key to doing that.
Yeah.
We need to allow them.
I was just in Kings Canyon National Park. It's in the Sierras, and we were hiking through this trail, and you would see some downed trees. Some of them were actually felled by park rangers, and they leave them there. They do some mulching right next to the trails, but the ones that are off the trail, they just leave. It will take, I don't know, 150, 200 years for that to break down. But in the old days, where there was more animals, it would have been much quicker, a few years, where that would have been trampled on and broken down much quicker.
Exactly. I think it would have been a little bit of everything everywhere. When we look at bird populations and insect populations, they've been declining for quite a long time. It's basically because, put it this way, we had the extinctions of the 10,000 years ago, and there were others kind of earlier as well. But that was kind of the major one. I think the changes started before there, because like when you look at, let's say, the gestation period of an elephant, it's 22 months. But when you look at when an elephant will actually produce a calf, you're looking at every 6 years, maybe 7 years, because when she has a calf, her sole kind of responsibility is to protect that calf until it's of a reasonable age before she'll get pregnant again. So looking at a long period of time. I've got a theory that we were hunting those animals, because this is, humans are very much a part of this, for a very long period of time. And if we're hunting an animal with a really slow replacement rate, then their populations would have been slowly declining for, let's say, 50,000 years or 100,000 years. When it reached 10,000 years ago, and maybe there were other environmental factors too, with the weather or whatever, and then the population just went and collapsed.
Yeah.
But the changes in the structure of the vegetation and the forest was slowly declining over all of that time. And maybe, I think we're still living in the remnants of that. The after effects are still playing out.
Yeah.
And it's quite sad that a lot of people are now trying to remove livestock and reduce deer numbers, because there's a big danger that we might end up with a situation where there just aren't any herbivores left.
Yeah.
I would hate for us to find out then that they're absolutely essential. I think we should be researching now into just how important they are for the functionality of the ecosystem.
Right.
From what I can see, they're absolutely essential, and we actually need to, in my opinion, and I know this is going to be controversial to an awful lot of people, but to be honest, I don't care what they think. I am 100% convinced that we probably need to increase the global population of herbivores, that's livestock and wild herbivores, because they're all important, we need to probably increase them by at least 50%, maybe double, maybe even triple. Because when you look at the quantity of carbon in plant material, I was looking at this the other day, I sent you a link, you can put this on later on if you want.
Sure.
450 gigatons of plant material on planet Earth.
Mm-hmm.
The wild mammals and the livestock and humans come to about, I think it was 1.006 or something gigatons. 450 gigatons of plants, and the animals that eat them, let's say it's 1.5 gigatons. It doesn't kind of add up, does it?
Mm-hmm.
So there are lots and lots of plants on our planet that never get eaten anymore.
Right.
They're not being impacted. They're not being browsed. They're not being shaped.
Right.
They're not being... All those multi-habitats, the dynamic multi-habitats, aren't happening. No wonder we've got ecological decline.
Yeah.
No wonder.
Yeah. Let's talk about how being nibbled on affects the plant itself. I was researching P. A. Yeomans. He developed the keyline plow in Australia in the 50s. His son, Allan, did work for his family's company and in Ecology too, and has written one book at least. I saw a talk he gave where he was talking about how when ruminant comes along on a prairie, they essentially act like a lawnmower and they eat the grass. It doesn't kill the grass. What happens is the grass sheds root, which creates and benefits the microbes, the microbe colony in the soil, which creates soil. That's what creates soil. And then they move on, and then the plant regrows, and then they come back, and cycle continues. And he was talking about trees. Basically, the roots of the grass in the soil operate very differently than the roots of the tree in the soil. But I came across, we started talking right after I heard that talk, and I started thinking, of course, these giant animals used to come and nibble on the trees from above, or at least, from the side. It just blew my mind. I know when you clip a plant and, you constrain its growth and stuff, it doesn't kill it. It responds to your pruning. And
this is the weird thing. Where did we learn how to prune? Or to coppice, or to pollard? Did it just miraculously, some guy was like, oh, what happens if we just go and cut all those branches off that tree or something?
Yeah.
I think we learnt it from the animals, and it's probably part of ancient wisdom through the eons. And when we did start agriculture, which is very debatable when we did it, so I think we actually started animal agriculture way back, not from 10,000 years ago with crops. We now use all those techniques in our orchards, in our gardens. You'll see Bob Flower Dew on that. Okay, clip this here and blah blah, cut it down hard and it will respond really well. But we don't allow that to happen in our forests because, oh my goodness me, it's damage.
Right.
I do this thing called elephant pruning, where I simulate what elephants did in my woodlands, or would do, or what I think they would do.
Yeah.
And they all do respond very well. It's quite amazing.
And then you could
rocket science.
Right. And you could feed your sheep, which you clip. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. As I kind of take the sheep through the woods, I kind of like do the crown lifting in where they are. They'll eat the lower parts that they can reach, and they can reach to maybe just up to 1 meter high. The sheep, they're quite small animals, so I cut the higher ones off that would be going to the elephants, and then feed them to the sheep, and they munch off some of the leaves. What is left, I don't discard. I save it all up, collect it up, and put it through a wood chipper on the back of my tractor. I got some of that for you. This is my wood chip.
There it is.
And this is what I burn on my fire. So 85% of my firewood this year are these wood chips.
Nice.
Very efficient. And when you look at mankind through the history, we didn't have fossil fuels to burn for most of it. We were burning wood. There's an English expression, I don't know if you've heard it, by hook or by crook. This was the rights of commoners to go, or certain groups of people to go into the woodlands and pull off branches to use for their firewood.
Oh, interesting.
They didn't have chainsaws.
Right.
They weren't going to drag a kind of 30-meter tree back home. They took faggots, and this is all the thin stuff, the branches. So the human impacts after those animals went extinct, we kind of replaced them with our own impacts, doing pretty much the same kind of thing. Then we had the Industrial Revolution, where there was a mass exodus from rural areas to the big cities. And so the workforce in the rural areas went down. We had the basic machines, and then the same thing happened again in the 40s and 50s when all the tractors arrived. And then there was a second exodus because, well, let's just sack kind of 6 farmhands because I've got a tractor. I don't need those people anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But the impacts that people had just collecting something simple like firewood, all gone.
Yeah. I mean, it just really, it sparks my imagination, but also it presses me. Like, what are we going to do? We're without these megafauna. We have to be pruning the trees on a huge scale. What do we do?
What do we do? Oh, it's quite simple. We've hardly got any wild mammals left.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's a terrible issue. In the places where they exist, they're pretty much under huge pressure, and they're very, very fragile. I didn't find out until months ago. The giraffe populations are down to, not a lot, but there's actually, I think, 3 or 4 different species of giraffe. So each individual species has an individual population much, much lower than the toad, and it's frightening.
Yeah.
You can't afford to lose them.
And I was thinking about, I don't know, I didn't even look this up, but I think I heard at some point the koalas, because koalas go up in the tree and they eat eucalyptus, but I hear that they have a reproduction problem. They're not doing it.
Yeah.
So they're fragile too.
All the normal background issues that they always faced are still present, and now there are a whole load of other man-made issues.
Yeah.
And some people say that, well, people should just stay out of nature. Just take all people out and let it heal itself.
Right.
Aren't without the herbivores. They just aren't enough of them.
Yeah, I think we're at a stage where it's our role to be stewards, and I think we have to get a lot better at it. We got to fix it. It's up to us. Yeah.
We've got to allow the animals to fix it. Here's the big next very controversial issue. Of all the mammals, then livestock are the biggest population of herbivores.
Mm-hmm.
They are.
Yep.
And a lot of people hate them for wrecking the landscape. That's a different subject. We could talk more about that later on, or maybe another time. But really, they're the only ones we've got left.
Yeah.
And there's a huge variety of genetic material within the whole group of livestock. We've got camels, we've got yak, water buffalo, cows, sheep, goats. There's a whole load of them.
Yeah.
What's the genetic material in the wild mammals? There's not as much of it. It might be more varied, but there isn't as much of it, or it's not as resilient. My controversial suggestion, I suppose, proposal, is that we use livestock to be surrogate wild animals, but we can mob graze them, we can control graze them anywhere. I could give me 50 cows and some electric fencing and maybe a cattle grid and a few different bits of paraphernalia and a wood chipper. I could go in any direction for 300 kilometers and go and do every square inch that landscape.
Right.
And because I'm migrating, I'm only there for a day or half a day and then I'm gone and everything's got a chance to regrow.
Mm-hmm.
We could be doing this in so many different places.
Yeah.
And if people are too scared to even think about it at the moment, then we should at least be researching it in a few places like the Amazon.
Yeah.
Don't cut the trees down. Let's get some livestock and one of those big machines that does chop trees down and do some pruning for giant ground sloth. Get some ecologists and some entomologists and botanists and some farmers and some engineers and all create a team and do some test plots in different places all the way around the world.
I love it.
And see what happens. Give it 5 years. I think we'd know within like 6 months that, hey, we should be going down this route.
Yeah.
And then we can give ecology, our ecosystem, the very, very best recovery, which won't be a total recovery, but if we can get closer to what it is now, then I think that's definitely a big gain.
Yeah.
The other thing is this idea about wild. It's like it's extinct, gone forever. Well, the time that human beings are here, we can't have wild because with our pollution, with all the things that we chuck into the rivers and the oceans, and because of all the herbivore losses, then even go to the North Pole and there's nobody lives there, but our impact is very, very visible there. Mm-hmm. Go to Siberia where there's like one person every square 100 kilometers. Mm-hmm. It's still playing out there.
Yeah.
There is nowhere that can be truly wild. So we have to kind of give it the best treatment. And for me, that is herbivores that can do that. we can control them, we can move them around safely, we can take them through the middle of cities. I mean, that's what used to happen. People used to graze Hyde Park, London, with sheep.
We were connecting on Twitter about that post about the sheep in Hyde Park. That's amazing.
There were drovers who operated from Wales in the UK and used to take livestock, cattle, sheep, all the way through to London or to Birmingham, to the big markets. They'd be eating the vegetation on the roadside all the way. What do we do in 2022? Oh, we mow it with fossil fuels and metal machines.
Right.
And it costs a lot of money, and everybody's like, oh, it all used to be eaten.
Right.
Or people made hay, and, things have changed incrementally. The animals have got all the answers.
Yeah.
I haven't got a big rut with scientists. I don't hate them or anything like that. Yeah, please don't think that.
Well, it just makes me think, remember when the tsunamis happened in 2004 and 2011? Any human being alive had never seen that scale of devastation before, and now we have it on video and we can see it with our eyes, and we have a different knowledge. But we're talking about animals. It went extinct over 10,000 years ago before recorded
and beyond.
And beyond.
Yeah.
And I don't blame people for not having even the imagination to understand this stuff. We gotta figure it out, because it's one of these primitive functions of nature that if we just abide by, we can work it out.
Yeah, it's like ecology is highly complex, but it sits on a very simple framework, and I think if we can put the framework back, then all the animals, all the different species, all the flora, all the fauna, the insects, everything, it will respond, and pretty quickly as well.
Yeah.
And, we don't have to be kind of doom all the time. But it really is we've got to enable it. We've got to let the animals do the right thing. But that's not just letting them all out there and running amok, because it ain't going to fit in with human society. And maybe the thing about the biggest risk of climate change is not the extinction of animals or plants, it's the extinction of the human race, because some people seem to be on that route, well and truly.
Yeah.
So, and we are wild animals. We're not sophisticated, we're not intelligent, because if we were really intelligent, we would have sussed it out a long, long time ago, wouldn't we?
Yeah,
we're probably the funnest lot out there.
It's so weird, because a lot of these solutions are the cheapest solutions. Everybody's talking about technological solutions, and I used to think that way too. It's really the simplest, cheapest solutions are the healthiest and best for the planet, for everything, for all of us. Yeah, nutrition in the soil.
And what the ecosystem produces is, for me, and it's most simple definition of the ecology and the ecosystem is it's a food system.
Yeah.
Nothing more, nothing less. It's a food system, and every species is food for something else.
That's right.
Everything should be really getting eaten, and everything should be able to find its ideal food, its optimum food within that system.
Yeah.
And the more we stray away from that, the more we go into high tech and let's do fake this, fake that.
Oh my God. People are talking about fake 3D printed plant-based steaks. Are you kidding me? It's like you call yourself an environmentalist? I don't even understand that. It's crazy. I think about the American prairie a lot. They say it was some of the most fertile soil around, and it was entirely because of the buffalo. And they would come around and mob graze it and leave, and then come back when it was strong again. But that microbe colony in that huge area, and we're talking about millions of animals. Just, there it is. That's the answer.
The crazy thing is now, for all those highly fertile soils that were supporting that system, the animals were removed, and we put crops in there.
Yeah.
And all the animals, and it's the same in the UK, are pushed onto the more marginal, hilly, rocky mountain land.
Yeah.
And the crops get all the best land, and the crops are actually depleting the soils.
Yeah.
What happens to, let's say, meat production, if you're looking at herbivores, because we're apex predators, we should be eating meat.
It's delicious.
What kind of quality meat and what kind of quantity of meat can we produce? And along with all the ecological benefits, if the livestock go back onto the quality land and start to improve it again.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Dr. Paul Saladino? He wrote a book.
I heard the name.
Yeah. He's a pretty popular guy. He was on Joe Rogan. He wrote a book that we have. It's called The Carnivore Code. The basic premise is that plants have natural defense systems just like animals do. With animals, they have outward claws and sharp teeth to fight other animals. Plants have chemistry and barbs and needles and spikes. You know, they have natural defenses against us eating them. So when we do eat them, most plants, he argues, most plants cause inflammation in human beings. And so vegetarianism, therefore, on a foundational level, is not a good idea. I
think depending where you live, I think there are places on the planet where you can have, let's say, 100% plant-based diet. But how many places? Because if you can't walk out of your front door and find nutritious plants within a 5-kilometer radius for 12 months of the year that are going to sustain you, then that tells me that the bulk of our diet was meat. And I mean, come on, our physiology, our brain, we are predators. We should be eating meat.
Absolutely. But the other idea is if you look at a cow has 2 stomachs, 4?
4, I think.
4?
I should know this.
We should know this. I'll look it up. I'll make us look smart here. But they have multiple stomachs so as to break down those toxic chemicals or inflammatory chemicals into milk that we consume, that their calves consume. But also, you know, when we eat their meat, it's absorbed all of those nutrients in a way that's, you know, even we can't do as well as humans. You know, we can't absorb plant nutrients as well as they do. So if you look at the stepping stones of nutrition's passing through the animal system, we're at the top end of that chain, and ruminant is here. It just makes sense if you.
There's actually one higher than us. Actually, that's our gut biome, because our bodies are just support mechanisms for the gut biome. They're the guys who are really in control.
Yeah, that's true.
They're at the top of the food chain,
guiding all my choices.
So I mean, that is amazing in itself. That you've got an ecosystem in your gut.
Yeah,
it's a whole fully functioning. Yeah, it should be fully functioning if you're getting the right food.
Right. And this is another thing. I just had a conversation with a microbiologist, and we were talking about, you know, like the same idea, like past history that wasn't recorded. We can't see it, so we don't know. Microbiology too is something that we've only recently been able to see and know that is there. You know, all of this stuff is new, and we're at the beginning of really learning about it.
Yeah. And what did it look like 20,000 years ago or 200,000 years ago? We can't really record those changes, can we? Because they're not available.
Yep.
The whole thing it is so fascinating. I think there was so much scope for, let's say, non-commercial research.
Mm-hmm. Well, commercial too, don't you think? Think about this.
I'm not saying no. I just know a lot of the corporates.
Sure. Well, consider this. You have a big investor, and he wants to start a cattle ranch, but there's no prairie in his area. But there's foothills with tons of trees, oak trees, whatever it is. If you can prove to him experimentally that you could go around with a crew and, you know, trim the trees and feed the cows that way, along with the shrubs and whatever else is around, that could be very profitable and commercial.
Yeah, but for who? I mean, I look at the herders and the pastoralists, look at the Maasai. They don't do it for money. They do it for survival, and it's just been a long, long, long tradition. And herbivores there aren't enough herbivores migrating. Most of them are gone. But look at the way that people still migrate. If we followed migrating herbivores out of Africa, you know, it kind of, all the migrations of the animals wouldn't have been just big, long, straight lines from Africa to Beijing.
Right.
It would have been a series of lots of different individual migrations of different species, different sizes of animals, seasonally. We tagged onto those and followed them around. Mm-hmm. And that's how I think we spread around so far around the globe to all different places.
Yeah.
Now the animals have gone, we still do our migrating, don't we? We still, commute? to a job 10 miles away and back every day. We all have these urges to do the traveling, and we go to the shops to buy our food, and we go on a vacation once a year if we're lucky, or if we're really, really lucky, 4 times a year.
Yeah.
Some people do.
Yeah.
And we go trekking in the Himalayas. Yeah, we always have this urge to go and migrate. It's a big part of human experience to travel. And I think that's probably where it came from. It's kind of rooted deep in our psyche. But funnily enough, the people who naturally migrate with animals, like a lot of the pastoralists, are getting the Bedouins, the nomads, and in places like the UK, the travellers, gypsies, the Romanis. They're under a huge social pressure from government, from society in general, because they're traveling, they're mobile, we don't trust them. There's a big kind of
sure, yeah.
People are getting oppressed all over the place, migratory people. And wouldn't it be great if those people could be operating a lot of herbivore migrations all over the planet, fixing our ecosystem? It would restore people's judgment of them. They're actually probably one of the oldest links of our ancient past.
That's true.
Still carrying out in their ethnic groups and their tradition. And most people in society are pretty obnoxious and hateful. Racism, slurs, insults, the whole lot. It's pretty despicable.
What's
how prone to that kind of behavior? But let's put it into perspective. They're the people who can fix a lot of this, and I would much rather that they took animals into the forest than some big business magnate with 2 billion quid or something.
I just brought that up because I think it's going to have to be a multi-pronged solution, and ideally everyone would be involved. Everyone wouldn't have this knowledge, and it would be just a huge shift in culture. How many Roma people are there? You only call them Roma in Europe, right?
Or Romani, I think.
Romani.
To be honest, I don't really know that much about them, but after I'd been studying migrations of animals and then the migrations of people, then the groups who still migrate became very interesting to me. And I kind of knew they were being pushed around anyway, because I follow a lot of geopolitics around the world. So sure. I knew that those people are under threat. But then when I looked at kind of what I think needs to happen with animals and forests and landscapes and plants and vegetation, then they're the ideal people to kind of operate those systems. I know in some of those communities, especially in the West, in Europe, the life expectancy is like lower than anybody else. The chances of suicide are much higher than anybody else. The educational opportunities are kind of compromised, either because, traveling or part traveling or unable to travel or living in poverty. There's so many different social issues that those people are facing on a daily basis. The rest of society just goes and does their jobs and looks down on them and thinking, well, what's wrong with them? Why aren't they doing what they should be?
Right.
And it's a bit like with the animals, if we think animals should be doing something different or people should be doing different, it's usually us who are wrong, and we need to understand them a lot more.
Yeah.
The migrating people, it's in their culture to migrate.
Right.
If they're not migrating, they're not happy. They're not they're not doing what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
So let's put two together, the migrating peoples, migrating animals around our landscapes and doing the Tesco car parks and the local park and the road verges and like Jim Smith's woodland on the way down there. They could be doing big migratory routes. And the great thing about livestock is, and I've said this on many occasions on Twitter, if we get great big energy problems or inflation problems, economic problems and stuff like that, or the internet goes down, because it could do. We don't know what's coming, climate change, or we have no idea.
Yeah, a coronal mass ejection.
Deliver themselves to your door or your local community. Carrots can't do that.
Yeah.
Livestock can. So they could be taking kind of livestock from, let's say, Scotland, and then gradually bring them down all the way through the summer, down to London for the markets later on in the autumn, or something like that. That was just a suggestion.
Sure.
This could be happening all over the world.
All over, all the time. Yeah.
And it used to. That is the thing. That's how, stuff got around a couple of 100 years ago or 300 years ago before the steam train.
Right.
It was all animal powered. Agriculture was animal powered.
Mm-hmm.
So we got all the answers. They're not that complicated, and they're pretty much low cost, and most of them are totally solar powered.
Mm-hmm. Are you in touch with anybody in academia locally in Poland who might be willing to fund an experiment?
I know a professor up in Warsaw, but I haven't seen him for a couple of years.
Okay. How far away? I don't know exactly what town you're in. How far away are you from Warsaw?
About 7 hours.
Oh, okay, pretty far.
I've never been there.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting because I have ideas. I want to do some experiments, finding the time and money.
I tell you what, if things do get really bad, we've got this Ukraine crisis, we've got inflation, we've got a lot of nasty, horrible geopolitics going on around the world. Yeah. It might be that we're actually forced into this kind of route just by things being the way they are. Mm-hmm. I think it's not down. I don't think it's down to business. I don't think it's down to government or kind of academics. I think most of the big changes we make are just people doing those changes, either by what we eat or allowing things to happen, just looking at things in a different way. Mm-hmm. But I don't think it's that difficult. And one of the great things, I know a lot of people who are mob grazing on meet them online. We all do it in a slightly different way. Everybody puts their own kind of interpretation, different impacts, different animals, and we're all on different landscapes anyway. Right. There's huge diversity in that. And most of those people do it pretty intuitively. Right. Because I can guarantee this, it's a kind of it is an instinctive thing. You just kind of get into it. It's really addictive.
I mean, I was thinking about you, what you were saying when you were starting to figure this out. It was you would watch the animals and you would see what they would do, and then you would see the effect of what they did, and then you adapt and a cycle of adaptation, basically. But that's what they're doing on their land, and everyone's got a slightly different intuitive adaptation. We should find if there's some database. I don't know if Allan Savory is doing this with his work, but a database of people's different styles and attempts and seeing what works.
I think the data collection is slowly starting to happen, and there are more and more people getting involved. One thing I just want to jump back to, because I mentioned wild animals before, and I was talking about these migrations with livestock. So the thing with wild herbivores is, because their numbers and their habitats are under great threat, if we can, let's say, learn a lot more about herbivores, their impacts on ecosystems, and also with migrations, why can't we do the same with elephants? Mm-hmm. I came up with a kind of bit of a design for fencing system, a mobile fencing system that could be used for elephants. It's just a bit bigger than the normal fence.
Right. Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you, how many large fauna that do this kind of tree eating exists anymore? There's elephants and giraffes. What else is there?
Trees. Well, sheep eat trees. Camels. Camels are great.
Okay.
Yeah, I got a couple of friends who are ecology professors who are really into camels. Okay. And I'm learning all the time about them. Fascinating.
Interesting.
There's still plenty around, but even if we don't, we don't have elephants in Europe, for example. The straightest elephant went extinct 30,000 years ago, apparently. So we don't have them, but we've got elephants in Africa. Could we borrow some elephants from a zoo and say, okay, let's go down the woods, let's see what you like to eat of the European vegetation. Okay, now we've got an idea. Then we can go out and reproduce that using livestock as the tramplers and the impactors on producing food or whatever. If the livestock can only reach up to, let's say, 1.8 meters, and an elephant can reach 4, then we can make up the difference. I've got a big long pole saw that I do my high pruning with.
Okay.
But there are the machines that deal with forestry that can strip a tree, branches, or take it down. If you train the drivers about large herbivore impacts and say, okay, don't clear fell the wood, but go in there and just, be a herd of browsing elephants. Put 3 machines in, you will go in there, you take kind of different trees out and just open the whole thing up. Am I saying to do that over everywhere? Not until we're kind of sure that it works.
Right.
Go and do a kind of a square hectare somewhere.
Yeah.
There's nothing stopping anybody doing that.
Right.
Just as a research, I mean, I'd love for some ecologists to actually, have a look at that, do it, and then see how everything responds. And I tell you what, I think they'd be amazed. That's my opinion.
I don't think there's any such thing as like experimental ecology, is there? I think the culture is like, let's just study it. Let's just look and not touch it.
What you slowly deteriorate.
Yeah, let's not touch it. Let's study it by not touching it, but not.
Then monitor that, everybody.
Right.
So no, it's like you think about animal impacts, then, the herbivores had big impact on the structure of forests, and we did to a certain extent, and then we kind of withdrew. It's down to us to kind of work it all out and to put all those impacts back in there and get it up and running again. And then there should be billions and trillions of insects around, and snakes and vertebrates, predators, and whatever. Because everything's going to find its kind of niche habitat at the right time of the year in the right place. In all of that, we'll have enough food as well.
Right. Yeah. It'll be more nutritious.
Oh, yeah. So, I'm proposing that we actually reduce the amount of arable that we do down to, a practical level, and increase the number of animals in the ecosystem. And that's all of them, not just livestock, but all of them.
Yeah.
How do you think that will go down in society? I don't know.
I don't know. I do feel hopeful. I feel like we're at a turning point, not just geopolitically, but I think we're going to figure some things out, because we have to. I think because we have to. Hopefully it's going to be the right things, and hopefully it changes our culture for the better. This is all really exciting to me. I mean, it's a whole different way of doing business on Earth.
Oh, it is. I mean, it's
different than what we do now, not from what used to be done, but...
Oh, yeah. But, I mean, I've been an environmentalist for 40 years. Got into, like, solar power and all the kind of off-grid. And I looked at all these things and participated in some of them. What I noticed in the last, 5 or 10 years, it's been hijacked.
Yeah.
It's been hijacked by a lot of people who this is a really good way to earn money.
Sure.
Let's kind of, I don't know. We could maybe have another discussion about that in the future. I mean, that is a big one. That's a really big one. And I don't think most people quite realize just how it's been infiltrated, really.
Yeah.
And hijacked. I mean, I see that as being highly dangerous, because a lot of the strategies and proposals that I see really don't make sense. They might do on a kind of superficial level, but we have to look down deep in the guts of it. It's like, holy,
it's big. People make money off big government contracts, and that's a great way to do business and make money. And I think people have figured that out, and it's the whole industry.
I mean, but look at just the environmental industry anyway. There's like, how many organizations are there out there? Just like thousands and thousands, and they all have an office and nice carpets and furniture and a marketing manager and a funding manager and a liaison manager and a community, and it's like, you're now employing 50 people, and all they're doing is pushing pieces of paper around and having nice little meetings and flying off to somewhere nice.
I live in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, and that's all around here. There's a lot of that.
Yeah. Like, what are they actually doing on the ground? What good are they doing?
Right.
And they kind of reap great big grant funding for grants or donations for the public, and the public are honestly trying to do something, because you know that a lot of people are concerned.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's a huge scam, a lot of it.
Yeah.
A lot of it is scam.
Yeah, it clearly is. Just look at, like you said, the amount of money that's being spent, and what are the results? What do we actually get from that?
And how many people bring books out? How many books are there on how to do this and that and how to fix the planet? And well, you don't get it in a book. You get it by doing it out there.
That's right. Yeah.
Putting impacts on the environment. That's
well, like I said, I think things are going to change. I mean, we know that what we have been doing isn't working. It's destroying the environment. But there are people that are doing things like regenerative agriculture that are working, and we can see that happening. And so it's, we're just there now. And it's weird to think, why haven't we figured this out sooner? But here we are, And I think we're going to figure it out. I hope.
Oh, yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm sure we are. It's it looks pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Yeah.
And not scary, and it doesn't have to threaten anybody's livelihood.
Right. Just a different way of thinking about it. Yeah.
Yeah. If you think that ecology is a fascinating subject, everything that happens in ecology gets mirrored in human society.
Of course.
We start to look at human society and how that operates, then that's not intact either. That's been totally dysfunctional for a long time. And when we look at the wars and all the different things that are happening, the geopolitical situation, economies, I don't think any of them are operating properly either. And I think everything is basically linked back to the ecology. What happens in society is basically
A reflection.
a reflection of what is happening and what has happened in ecology.
Yeah.
So that's just like, well, that's mind-blowing. There's a whole load of stuff in there.
Yeah. Well, if one thing is out of balance, how can the other one be in balance? It's not blessable.
Yeah. The whole thing is a functioning ecosystem. We're part of it, not separate from it. Big part of it.
Well, yeah, I would love to talk to you about that. It sounds amazing.
Yeah, some of that is pretty scary actually, but
All right, then we won't talk about it.
Yeah, we ought to. We
will. Well, thank you, Sam. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time.
Yeah.
Take care.
Thank you.